The slap didn't just echo through the crystal-filled dining room. It shattered the underworld's fragile peace, marking the moment a waitress saved a monster to prevent a massacre. I grew up believing that silence was the loudest sound in the world. In the Santoro family, silence meant a deal was done, a life was ended, or a war was beginning. But that night at La Velluti, amidst the clinking of silver forks and the low hum of Chicago's elite pretending to be civilized, the noise that changed my life was a sharp, violent crack of skin against skin. My father, Marco Santoro, sat at the head of the table like a king on a borrowed throne. He was wearing that ridiculous cream-colored suit, the one he only brought out when he wanted to insult his enemies by looking pristine while doing dirty work. We were miles from our stronghold in New York, deep in Chicago territory, negotiating a truce with the Alvarez cartel that was held together by nothing more than spit and handshake promises. I sat to his right, my back to the wall, scanning the room. That's my job. I'm Derek Santoro, the only son, the heir, and the glorified bodyguard. I look for threats so he can look at the menu. The restaurant was a theater of opulence, with chandeliers that sparkled like they were hiding sins in every crystal. But my eyes kept snagging on one person. She wasn't a threat, or so I thought. She was a waitress. Her name tag read Elena. But she didn't move like the other staff. She was a striking black woman with hair pulled back in a severe, no-nonsense bun, but it was her eyes that unnerved me. They weren't deferential. They were calculating. She was watching my father not with awe, but with the precision of a bomb squad technician watching a timer countdown. I shifted in my seat, my hand drifting toward the inside of my jacket where my Glock rested against my ribs. The Alvarez representatives were smiling, their gold teeth flashing under the warm lights. The waiter, a nervous kid who looked too young to be pouring a vintage that cost more than his tuition, trembled as he filled my father's glass with a heavy red wine. My father laughed at a joke he didn't find funny, raised the glass, and the room seemed to hold its breath. I saw Elena move before anyone else did. She didn't run, she glided, covering the distance between the service station and our table with terrifying speed. Just as the crystal rim touched my father's lips, she was there. She didn't speak. She didn't warn him. She swatted the glass from his hand, sending red wine splashing across the pristine white tablecloth like a spray of arterial blood. And then, with the same fluid motion, she slapped the Dawn of New York across the face. The sound was thunderous. For a heartbeat, the world stopped. The music seemed to die. The Alvarez men stood up, chairs scraping violently against the floor, hands reaching for weapons. I was already on my feet, my gun half drawn, adrenaline spiking through my veins. My father's men, Tony and Sal, spread out like predators, ready to turn the high-end eatery into a slaughterhouse. My father sat frozen, a red handprint blooming on his cheek, his eyes wide with a mixture of shock and lethal rage. He looked at her, his mouth opening to give the order that would end her life. But Elena didn't flinch. She didn't back down. She grabbed the lapels of his $1,000 suit and hissed, a sound that cut through the tension like a razor. "You're being poisoned." The rage in the room paused, suspended by confusion. I looked at the shattered glass on the floor. The wine was sizzling faintly against the carpet fibers. "He poured the wine," Elena said, her voice steady, pointing a finger toward the kitchen doors. "The busboy. He wasn't staff. He just walked in, took the bottle and poured. Look at him." We turned. The kid who had poured the wine was sprinting toward the back exit, discarding his apron as he ran. I looked back at my father. He tried to stand, to shout, but instead he coughed, a wet, rattling sound. The color drained from his face instantly, replaced by a sickly gray. His hand went to his throat. He gasped, his eyes rolling back. "Dad!" I shouted, dropping my guard and rushing to him. "He's going into anaphylactic shock, likely a neurotoxin," Elena said, her voice devoid of panic. She shoved me aside, actually shoved me, and took control. "Get ice. And call 911, tell them it's a paralytic agent." She moved him into a recovery position with a technique I'd never seen outside of military training. She pressed her fingers against his neck, checking his pulse, while keeping his airway open. The Alvarez men stood watching, confused, guns lowering slightly. This wasn't a hit, it was a rescue. My father gasped for air, clutching Elena's forearm with a desperation that terrified me. The invincible Marco Santoro was dying, and the only thing tethering him to this world was the woman who had just assaulted him. "Stay with me," she commanded him, her voice hard. "You don't get to die today." The paramedics arrived 7 minutes later. By the time they loaded him onto the stretcher, confirming that the wine was laced with enough cyanide derivative to kill a horse, the chaos had settled into a heavy, suffocating dread. I turned to thank her, to grab her, to ask who the hell she really was. But the spot where she had been standing was empty. The kitchen doors swung gently, but there was no one there. I ran to the back alley, weapon drawn, expecting a getaway car or a fight. There was nothing but the damp Chicago wind and the distant wail of sirens. Elena was gone. The busboy was gone. And as I stood there, watching the ambulance lights fade into the distance, I realized the slap hadn't just saved his life. It had started a clock. Someone knew exactly where we would be. Someone knew the table. And someone had placed a guardian angel, or a handler, right in our path. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, my hand still shaking. It wasn't a text. It was a picture of a handwritten note, sent from an unknown number. "Your father wasn't the only target. If he dies, the East Coast burns. Find the truth before they find you." I looked up at the dark skyline. The war hadn't been avoided. It had just changed battlefields. And the woman named Elena was the only map I had. Reflection. Have you ever been in a situation where the person trying to hurt you was actually the only one saving you from something worse? It's a terrifying thought, that we might be fighting off our own salvation because it comes in a painful package. If this story hooked you, I need you to smash that subscribe button right now. Drop a comment below telling me which city you are reading from. Let's see where the family has influence. Hit like if you want to see Derek hunt down the truth. The antiseptic sting of Mercy Hospital's waiting room was a poor substitute for the garlic and expensive wine that still stained my shirt, but it was the only air I had left to breathe. My father was alive, stabilized in a private ICU wing that we had essentially commandeered. 2 of our men stood outside his door, looking more like gargoyles than guards, while the Alvarez crew paced the hallway on the floor below, their alliance with us hanging by a thread thinner than the 4-line in my father's arm. I couldn't stay there. Watching the heart monitor beep was driving me insane. Every rhythmic chirp sounded like a countdown I didn't know how to stop. I left Tony, my father's right hand, in charge of the door and walked out into the biting Chicago night. The rain had started, washing the city streets with a grime that felt permanent. I needed answers. I needed to know who the hell Elena was. I drove back to Velluti. The restaurant was closed, police tape fluttering across the mahogany double doors like a mockery of a grand opening ribbon. But police tape doesn't stop men like me. I bypassed the front, slipping through the same service entrance the busboy had fled through. Inside, the kitchen was silent, save for the hum of the industrial refrigerators. I found the manager's office in the back, the door locked. I kicked it open. The manager, a sweating, balding man named Stefano, was already there, frantically shredding papers. When he saw me, he nearly fell out of his chair. "Mr. Santoro. I didn't know." "Shut up, Stefano," I said, closing the distance between us and slamming my hand down on his desk. "The waitress, Elena. I want her file. I want her address, her social, her emergency contact. Now." Stefano looked at me, his eyes bulging. "Elena? Mr. Santoro, please, I've been trying to tell the police, we don't have an Elena." I grabbed him by his tie, twisting it until his face turned a shade of plum. "Don't lie to me. She served table 4. She's been here all night. Black woman, sharp eyes, hair in a bun. She saved my father's life after your staff tried to kill him." "I swear," he wheezed. "I checked the roster. I checked the payroll. We have no one by that name. No one who fits that description worked tonight. I didn't hire her." I shoved him back into his chair and turned to the computer on his desk. "Pull up the security feed. The dining room. 8 p.m. to 8:30 p.m. Stefano's shaking hands fumbled with the mouse. The screen flickered to life, showing the grainy, black and white view of the dining floor. We watched the time stamp. 8:14 p.m. My father is laughing. I'm scanning the room. Then the glitch happened. At 8:15 p.m., right when Elena would have started walking toward the table, the video stuttered. The image froze, pixelated violently, and jumped forward 10 seconds. In the skipped frames, the wine glass was already on the floor, my father was gasping, and I was standing up with my gun drawn. Elena wasn't there. The camera angle had been manipulated, or the feed had been scrubbed in real time. Go to the back alley camera, I commanded, my blood running cold. Show me the busboy running out. Stefano clicked. 8:20 p.m. The back door swings open. But instead of a person running out, the feed looped a segment of an empty alleyway from an hour prior. The rain in the video didn't match the rain hitting the window right now. It's a loop, I whispered. Someone hacked your system. I stared at the screen. This wasn't just a hit. A hit is messy. A hit is a drive-by or a bomb. This was a surgical strike. They had inserted operatives into a high-security environment, bypassed vetting, poisoned a Don, and erased their tracks before the ambulance even arrived. Who are the vendors? I asked, my mind racing. The wine distributor. The cleaning crew. Who has access to this building? Only trusted partners, Stefano stammered. We've used the same people for 10 years. I didn't bother responding. I turned and walked out. The implications were terrifying. If Elena wasn't an employee, and the busboy wasn't staff, then they were ghosts. And the woman who saved my father wasn't just a good Samaritan. She was a professional. I drove to the hotel where we were staying, the Peninsula. My head was pounding. I needed a shower and a plan. I took the private elevator to the penthouse suite, scanning the corridor for anything out of place. When I reached my room, I swiped the key card and pushed the heavy door open. I did a sweep, bathroom, closet, balcony. I sat on the edge of the bed, burying my face in my hands. The image of Elena slapping the drink away played on a loop in my mind. The ferocity of it. The precision. I looked down at the floor. A creamy white envelope was peeking out from under the door connecting my room to the hallway. I froze. I had just checked the hall. It was empty. Someone had slid this under in the 10 seconds I had been in the bathroom. I drew my gun, rushed to the door, and ripped it open. The hallway was empty. The elevator indicator was still on my floor. The stairwell door was shut. I picked up the envelope. It was heavy, high-quality paper. There was no name on the front. I tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of hotel stationery with handwriting that was elegant, sharp, and hurried. Your father wasn't the only target. If he dies, the East Coast burns. Find the truth before they find you. There was no signature. But I knew who it was from. Elena. She hadn't disappeared. She was tracking me. And if she was tracking me, so were the people who wanted us dead. The realization hit me like a physical blow. I wasn't the hunter in this scenario. I was the bait. And I had no idea if the woman in the shadows was the hook or the line that would pull me to safety. The paper felt heavy in my hand, a physical weight that exceeded its mass. Find the truth before they find you. I stared at the elegant, hurried loops of the handwriting. It wasn't a threat, it was a directive. And it confirmed the one thing I had been afraid to admit. We were compromised from the inside out. I didn't pack. I didn't have time. I grabbed my jacket, shoved the note into my pocket, and checked the magazine of my Glock. 15 rounds. It didn't feel like enough. If Elena, or whoever she was, could slip a note under my door in a secured hotel wing, then the people hunting my father could put a bullet in my head while I waited for the elevator. I bypassed the main lifts. I took the service stairwell, the concrete cold and echoing under my boots. My mind was racing, trying to connect the dots. The poison at La Velluti wasn't a random assassination attempt. It was a declaration of war designed to look like a failure of security. If my father died, the Santoro family would crumble into infighting. If he lived but remained incapacitated, we were weak. But Elena had saved him. I reached the parking garage, the air thick with the smell of oil and damp concrete. My car, a rental sedan, was parked in the corner of level B2. I didn't walk straight to it. I stuck to the shadows, moving between the rows of parked luxury SUVs and sports cars, my eyes scanning for movement. That's when I saw them. Two men were standing by my car. They weren't hotel security. They were dressed in dark, nondescript clothing, standing with the casual alertness of soldiers waiting for a target. One was checking his phone. The other was watching the elevator doors I had just avoided. I froze behind a concrete pillar. Elena's note wasn't just a warning about the future, it was a warning about now. I couldn't go back up. I couldn't go to the car. I needed a distraction. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my key fob. I pressed the panic button. The horn of my rental car began to blare, the headlights flashing rhythmically in the dim garage. The two men jumped, hands flying to their waistbands, guns. Definitely pros. They moved toward the car, assuming I was close. I took the opportunity. I sprinted in the opposite direction, toward the exit ramp. I didn't look back until I heard the shout. "He's over there!" The ramp! A bullet chipped the concrete inches from my head, the sound of the shot deafening in the enclosed space. I didn't slow down. I scrambled up the ramp, lungs burning, and burst out into the Chicago night. The rain was coming down harder now, a freezing sheet that soaked me instantly. I flagged down a taxi, throwing myself into the back seat before the driver could even ask where I was going. "Drive?" I barked, flashing $100 bill. "O'Hare Airport. Fast." As the taxi merged into traffic, I pulled out my burner phone, a device I kept for emergencies only. I dialed Tony at the hospital. "Status," I said when he picked up. "He's stable, Derek. But the cops are swarming the place. Detectives want to talk to you." "Listen to me, Tony. Do not let them in the room. Do not let anyone in that room who you haven't personally patted down. No food from the cafeteria. No meds unless you watch the nurse draw them from a sealed vial. You understand?" "Derek, what's going on? Where are you?" "I'm going hunting," I said, my voice grim. "The hit at the restaurant, it wasn't the Alvarezes. It was someone else. Someone who wants us to blame them. I'm going to find out who." I hung up and pulled the battery out of the phone. By the time I reached O'Hare, the adrenaline had settled into a cold, hard resolve. I wasn't going to fly commercial. That was a good way to get flagged by the feds or tracked by our enemies. Instead, I headed to the private hangars. The Santoro family had connections everywhere, even in the Midwest. A friend of my father's, a logistics magnate named Russo, owed us a favor. 30 minutes later, I was sitting on a crate in the back of a cargo plane bound for New York. It wasn't comfortable, but it was off the grid. As the plane vibrated during takeoff, I took the note out again. I held it up to the dim light of the cargo hold. I had missed something before. In the rush, I hadn't looked closely at the paper itself. I ran my thumb over the texture. It was Peninsula Hotel stationery, yes. But there was an indentation on the back, like someone had written on a piece of paper on top of this one, pressing hard. I grabbed a pencil from a nearby clipboard and lightly shaded over the indentations. Slowly, ghost letters appeared. 742 Evergreen. Pittsburgh. It wasn't an address I recognized. But it was a lead. Elena hadn't just warned me, she had left me a breadcrumb trail, hidden in plain sight. She knew I would look. She knew I would survive the garage. Why Pittsburgh? Pittsburgh was neutral ground. It was Rust Belt territory, mostly abandoned by the major families years ago. It was a ghost town for the Mafia. Perfect for hiding. Or for planning a war. "The East Coast burns," she had written. I closed my eyes, the roar of the engines drowning out my thoughts. The families in Philadelphia and Detroit were already shifting, sensing blood in the water. If I didn't find out who was pulling the strings soon, there wouldn't be a Santoro empire left to inherit. I was flying into the storm. And somewhere in that storm was a waitress who could disable a dawn with a slap and vanish into thin air. I didn't know if I wanted to thank her or arrest her. But I knew one thing, I was going to find her. The cargo plane touched down on a private strip in New Jersey just as the sun was beginning to bleed through the gray horizon. I didn't wait for the ramp to fully lower before I jumped, my boots hitting the tarmac with a jarring thud. I was back on home soil, but I felt like a foreigner in my own territory. The Santoro Empire was centered here, But without knowing who had betrayed us, every familiar face was a potential executioner. I bypassed the main family compounds. Instead, I took a cab to a storage unit in Newark I kept under a fake name, Jonathan Doe, the most unoriginal alias in the book, which made it perfectly invisible. Inside was a go bag, a clean burner phone, cash, and a nondescript Ford sedan with swapped plates. I stripped out of my suit, changing into jeans and a dark hoodie. Derek Santoro, the Prince of New York, ceased to exist. In his place was just another man on the road, heading west. The drive to Pittsburgh took 6 hours. 6 hours of silence. 6 hours to think about the woman who had dismantled my father's security with a wine glass and a slap. I kept replaying the moment. The way she checked his pulse. The way she commanded the room. That wasn't just courage, it was training. She moved like she had done it 1,000 times before. Was she ex-military? Intelligence? A rival cleaner? I arrived in Pittsburgh just after noon. The city was a sprawling maze of bridges and steel, a place that had reinvented itself from a smoky industrial hub to a tech center, but the shadows of the old world still lingered. 742 Evergreen was located in a quiet, leafy suburb on the outskirts, the kind of place where neighbors waved at each other and walked golden retrievers. It was the last place I expected to find the breadcrumbs of a mafia war. The house was a small, brick bungalow with overgrown ivy crawling up the trellis. The driveway was empty. The curtains were drawn. It looked abandoned, but not neglected. It looked like a safe house. I parked 2 blocks away and approached on foot, sticking to the tree line. I circled the perimeter. No cameras that I could see, which in itself was suspicious. Pros don't leave blind spots unless they want the house to look unassuming. I picked the lock on the back door. It was a simple tumbler, too easy. I drew my weapon and pushed the door open, stepping into a kitchen that smelled of stale coffee and dust. Clear, I whispered to myself, moving room to room. Living room, clear. Bathroom, clear. I moved to the bedroom, the door slightly ajar. I pushed it open with the barrel of my gun. It wasn't a bedroom. It was a command center. The walls were covered in corkboards. Maps of New York, Chicago, and Philadelphia were pinned up, connected by varying colors of string. Red for the Santoros. Blue for the Alvarezes. Green for a third faction I didn't recognize. I stepped closer, lowering my gun. This wasn't the work of a lunatic, it was the work of a strategist. There were photos everywhere. Telephoto shots of my father leaving his club. Photos of me entering my apartment. Photos of the Alvarez brothers. She had been watching us for months, maybe years. My eyes landed on a specific cluster of photos in the center of the main board. It was a timeline of the dinner at La Velluti. There was a grainy photo of the busboy, the poisoner. X was drawn through his face. Next to it was a printout of a wire transfer. $500,000. Sender, unknown. Recipient, Matteo, the rat, Grigori. I froze. Matteo Grigori was my father's capo in Jersey. A man who had held me when I was a baby. A man who had sworn loyalty on his mother's grave. The realization hit me like a physical blow. The call wasn't coming from outside the house. The poison didn't come from the Alvarezes. It came from us. Elena hadn't just saved my father from a hit, she had stepped into the middle of a coup. I turned to the desk in the corner. A laptop sat there, open but asleep. I tapped the spacebar. The screen lit up. It wasn't password protected. On the screen was a live video feed. I leaned in, squinting. It was a camera feed of a room. A hotel room. I recognized the curtains. It was my room at the Peninsula in Chicago. And then the feed switched. It showed the interior of a car. My rental car. The one I had abandoned in the garage. She wasn't just watching the bad guys. She was watching me. A floorboard creaked behind me. I spun around, raising my gun, my heart hammering against my ribs. Standing in the doorway, leaning casually against the frame with her arms crossed, was Elena. She wasn't wearing a waitress uniform anymore. She was in tactical gear, black cargo pants, a fitted black shirt, and a holster strapped to her thigh. She didn't look scared. She looked annoyed. "Took you long enough, Derek," she said, her voice calm and terrifyingly familiar. "I was starting to think you weren't as smart as your file said you were." "Who are you?" I demanded, keeping the gun trained on her center mass. "I'm the only reason you're still breathing," she replied, walking past the gun barrel as if it were a toy. She moved to the corkboard and pulled out a pin. "And right now, I'm your only option. Because while you were playing detective, Mateo just put a $5 million bounty on your head. Every hitman from Boston to DC is looking for you. So, you can shoot me, or you can listen." She turned back to me, her eyes locking onto mine. "Put the gun down, Derek. We have work to do." I didn't lower the gun. In my world, you don't lower your weapon just because someone asks nicely, especially not when that person is a ghost who can disable a Mafia don in under 3 seconds. "Give me one reason why I shouldn't put a bullet in your leg just to keep you from running again," I said, my finger tightening on the trigger. Elena sighed, walked over to the desk, and turned the laptop screen toward me. She tapped a few keys. A grainy image of a dark web forum appeared. It was a hit list. My face was at the top. Price, $5 million. Status, open. Contract holder, the commission. "Mateo didn't just put a bounty on you, Derek," she said, her voice dropping an octave, losing the sarcasm. "He sanctioned you. He told the commission that you were the one who poisoned your father. He's painting you as the patricidal maniac who wants the throne early. The entire underworld isn't just looking for you. They think they're doing a public service by killing you." The blood drained from my face. It was the perfect frame job. If I was dead and my father was incapacitated, Mateo, the loyal capo, would step in as regent to restore order. By the time my father woke up, if he ever did, the family would be Mateo's. I lowered the gun. "Who are you?" I asked again, the question heavier this time. "You're not FBI. You're not Alvarez." "I'm a cleaner," Elena said, moving to a metal cabinet and pulling out a heavy duffel bag. She tossed a Kevlar vest at me. "Put this on. We have maybe 10 minutes before the first team traces my login here." I turned the laptop on to get your attention, but it also lit a flare for them. "You did what?" I stared at the vest. "I needed you to trust me." "Fear makes people listen fast," she said, checking the magazine of a Sig Sauer. "My name is Elena." That part was real. I used to work for a private intelligence firm that handled sensitive corporate problems. But I work for myself. And right now, my interest is keeping the East Coast from turning into a war zone. "Why do you care?" I asked, shrugging into the vest. It was tight, professional grade. She paused, looking at a photo on the corkboard, a picture of a young girl, unrelated to the mob chart. "Because Mateo isn't just taking over your family. He's selling the distribution routes to a sex trafficking ring out of Eastern Europe. Your father deals in gambling and unions. He has a code. Mateo has none. If Mateo wins, thousands of girls disappear. That's my line." She looked at me, her eyes hard as flint. "I saved your father because he's the lesser of two evils. And I'm saving you because you're the only one who can get close enough to Mateo to stop him." A sound from outside cut our conversation short. The crunch of gravel. Elena moved instantly, killing the lights. The room plunged into gray twilight. She moved to the window, peering through the slit in the curtains. 2 SUVs. Blacked out. No plates. "That's the cleaning crew," she whispered. "Mateo doesn't waste time." "How do we get out?" I asked, gripping my Glock. "We don't go out the doors," she said. She moved to the rug in the center of the room and kicked it aside. Beneath it was a trapdoor. This house was built by bootleggers in the 20s. Tunnels run to the storm drain. Glass shattered in the living room. A flashbang grenade detonated with a deafening bang, filling the front of the house with blinding light and smoke. "Go," she hissed, pulling the trapdoor open. I dropped into the darkness, the smell of damp earth and rust hitting me. Elena followed, pulling the door shut above us just as heavy boots thundered on the floorboards overhead. "Flashlights off," she whispered, her hand grabbing my shoulder to guide me. "They'll see the beam." We moved through the cramped dirt tunnel, hunched over. Above us, I could hear the muffled sounds of men shouting, furniture being overturned. They were tearing the house apart looking for us. Where does this come out? I whispered. 3 blocks down. Beside a creek. I have a car stashed there. We moved in silence for what felt like an hour but was probably only 5 minutes. The tunnel opened up into a concrete storm drain. We splashed through ankle-deep water, the cold seeping into my boots. Elena stopped at a rusty iron grate. She pushed it open, and we emerged into a thicket of bushes near a small park. The rain was still falling. She led me to a beat-up Honda Civic parked on the street. It looked like a piece of junk, rust on the wheel wells, a dented bumper. Perfect camouflage. Get in, she said, unlocking it. As I slid into the passenger seat, I looked at her. She was calm, methodical. She had just saved my life again. So, I said as she hotwired the car, she didn't even use a key. We're partners now? She revved the engine, the car springing to life with a surprising purr. The engine had been modified. Don't get ahead of yourself, Santoro, she said, throwing the car into gear. You're my asset. I'm your handler. And right now, we're going to the one place Matteo won't expect us to go. Where? She smiled, a dangerous, sharp expression. We're going to crash his victory party. As the Civic merged onto the highway, disappearing into the flow of traffic, I realized 2 things. I was terrifyingly out of my league, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't just following orders. I was about to start a revolution. And the woman driving the car was the most dangerous weapon I had ever seen. The drive from Pittsburgh back to the East Coast was a blur of caffeine, adrenaline, and silence. Elena drove like a machine, eating up the miles on the Pennsylvania Turnpike while I worked on the burner laptop, trying to dismantle the digital cage Matteo had built around me. Matteo is hosting a Unity Gala tonight, I said, reading the encrypted chatter on a dark web forum used by the families. Alpine, New Jersey. His estate. He's inviting the heads of the Philadelphia, Boston, and Atlantic City crews. He's going to announce his temporary leadership formally. Elena didn't take her eyes off the road. It's a coronation, she corrected. Once they drink his wine and shake his hand, you're officially history. If you show up tomorrow, you're just a usurper. If we stop him tonight, you're the rightful heir returning to clean house. He'll have security tight as a drum, I countered. Facial recognition at the gate, metal detectors, the works. We can't just walk in. We're not walking in, Elena said, exiting the highway onto a dark, wooded service road in northern Jersey. We're rolling in. Open the glove box. I popped the latch. Inside was a set of high-tech translucent masks, the kind used in high-stakes heist movies, but these looked terrifyingly real, and 2 invitation cards embossed with gold leaf. How? I asked, looking at the invitations. They were addressed to a Mr. and Mrs. Vance, a legitimate shipping couple from Delaware who often laundered money for the Philly mob. I intercepted the Vances 3 hours ago in Ohio, she said casually. They're currently tied up in a motel room with a very looping movie on the TV. They won't be missed until morning. We pulled up to a secluded storage facility. Inside Unit 404, Elena had another stash. But this wasn't tactical gear. It was a wardrobe. Get changed, she ordered, tossing me a tuxedo that looked like it cost more than the Honda we drove. And shave. The Vances are old money. You need to look like you've never worked a day in your life. I went to the bathroom to change. When I came out, I stopped dead. Elena had transformed. The tactical gear was gone. In its place was a floor-length emerald gown that hugged every curve, with a slit that ran dangerously high up her thigh. Her hair was down, cascading in loose waves. She had applied makeup that softened her sharp features, making her look less like an assassin and more like a trophy wife. But I noticed the way the dress was cut, loose enough around the thigh to hide a holster, structured enough at the bodice to conceal a knife. Close your mouth, Santoro, she said, strapping a tiny communication piece into her ear. We're on a schedule. We took a black Mercedes S-Class from the storage unit, another of her assets, and drove to Alpine. The estate was a fortress disguised as a palace. Iron gates, spotlights, and a line of limousines snaking up the driveway. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was suicide. Relax, Elena murmured as we pulled up to the valet. You're boring. You're rich. You're entitled. Channel that. I put on the translucent mask in the dark of the car, adjusting the adhesive. It didn't change my face entirely, just enough to fool the cameras. Altered jawline, different nose shape. I put on a pair of thick-rimmed glasses to complete the look. We stepped out. The air smelled of expensive perfume and impending violence. We moved through the security checkpoint. I held my breath as the guard scanned the invitation. "Welcome, Mr. Vance," the guard said, waving us through. We walked into the grand ballroom. It was a sea of black ties and diamonds. And there, in the center of the room, standing under a massive chandelier, was Mateo. He looked triumphant. He was holding a glass of champagne, laughing with the dawn of Philadelphia. He looked like a man who had won everything. "Target acquired," Elena whispered, her arm looped through mine. Her grip was iron. "Do not engage yet. We need him to confess. We need the room to hear it." "How are we going to do that?" I whispered back, smiling fake smiles at people passing by. "I rigged the sound system while you were sleeping in the car," she said, picking a glass of champagne off a tray. "But we need his voice print to authorize the override. You need to get close to him. You need to make him gloat." "If I get close, he'll recognize me," I hissed. "Not with the mask," she said. "And besides, look who just walked in." I followed her gaze to the main entrance. My blood ran cold. Walking in, flanked by 2 bodyguards, was the one person I hadn't expected. The one person who could ruin everything. It was my ex-fiancée, Isabella. The daughter of the Alvarez cartel boss. The woman whose family I was supposed to be at war with. And she was walking straight toward Mateo with a look that could kill. "Twist number 3, Elena whispered. "The Alvarezes aren't buying the story. If she starts shooting, we lose our chance to clear your name. You have to stop her, Derek, without blowing your cover." I looked at Mateo, then at Isabella, then at Elena. The room was a powder keg, and everyone was holding a match. "Fine," I said, adjusting my cuffs. "Time to dance." The waltz ended, but the music of the gala was quickly replaced by the dissonance of panic. The moment Mateo's voice boomed through the speakers, confessing to treason, attempted murder, and bribery, the atmosphere shifted from celebration to suffocation. I peeled the prosthetic mask from my face, the adhesive ripping at my skin, and threw the thick-rimmed glasses to the floor. "You don't have the power, Mateo," I said, my voice cutting through the stunned silence near the dais. "You have a confession." Mateo stared at me, his eyes bulging as if he were seeing a ghost. "Derek." "It's over," I said, my hand drifting to the gun tucked at the small of my back. "The police commissioner is standing by the buffet. I don't think he appreciated hearing that you owned him on a hot mic." Mateo's face twisted from shock to pure, unadulterated primal rage. He realized the game was up. There was no talking his way out of this. He reached inside his tuxedo jacket. "Kill him!" Mateo screamed, saliva flying from his mouth. "Kill them all!" The room exploded. Elena moved faster than I could process. She kicked the back of Mateo's knee, sending the heavy-set man crumbling to the marble floor. In the same fluid motion, she produced a sleek, silenced pistol from the slit in her emerald dress. "Get down," she shouted, shoving me hard. I hit the floor just as the crystal vase on the table beside me shattered into 1,000 glittering shards, decimated by a submachine gun burst from the balcony. Mateo's loyalists, men I had grown up with, men I had tipped at Christmas, were opening fire into the crowd. Panic seized the gala. Guests were screaming, overturning tables for cover, trampling each other to get to the gilt-edged doors. I rolled behind a heavy oak pillar, drawing my Glock. "Elena! Status! We're pinned!" she yelled from behind an overturned catering table. She popped up, firing 2 precise shots. 2 of Mateo's guards on the stairs dropped. "Isabella needs to move her people now or we're dead." As if on cue, the distinct boom of heavy-caliber handguns echoed from the west side of the ballroom. Isabella and her Alvarez bodyguards had joined the fray. They weren't shooting at us. They were cutting a swath through Mateo's security detail. I saw Isabella, her gown torn at the hem to allow movement, firing with a cold precision that reminded me why I had fallen in love with her. She caught my eye across the chaotic room and nodded toward the kitchen doors. Exit. Grab Matteo, I shouted to Elena. We need him alive. He's crawling away. Matteo was scrambling on his hands and knees toward the service exit, shielded by 3 of his remaining enforcers. Cover me! I yelled. Elena unleashed a suppressing volley, forcing the enforcers to duck. I sprinted across the open floor, sliding over the polished marble like a baseball player stealing home. Bullets chipped the floor inches from my feet. I collided with Matteo, tackling him just as he reached the door. We crashed into a waiter station, sending trays of silverware clattering everywhere. He was strong, fueled by desperation. He punched me in the jaw, a heavy ring tearing my skin. You ungrateful bastard, he grunted, trying to gouge my eyes out. I headbutt him. My forehead cracked against his nose, and I felt cartilage give way. Matteo screamed and fell back, clutching his face. I grabbed him by the collar and dragged him upright, using him as a human shield as his own men hesitated to fire. Tell them to stand down. I roared, pressing the barrel of my Glock into his temple. Shoot him! Matteo shrieked, blood pouring through his fingers. Shoot him, you cowards! His men raised their weapons. They didn't care about him anymore. He was a liability. Suddenly, a black SUV crashed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the ballroom, showering the room in glass and twisted metal. The vehicle skidded to a halt in the center of the dance floor, tires screeching. The back doors flew open. Get in, a voice bellowed. It was Tony, my father's right hand. Go! Elena shouted, grabbing my arm and dragging me and the stumbling Matteo toward the car. We threw Matteo into the back seat and dove in after him. Isabella and 2 of her men jumped into the trunk space and the passenger seat. Tony floored it. The SUV roared, reversing out through the shattered window, bouncing over the debris, and tearing onto the lawn. Gunfire chased us into the night, shattering the rear windshield, but we were moving too fast. We hit the main road, the lights of the estate fading behind us. I slumped back against the seat, my chest heaving. The car was silent except for the wind rushing through the broken glass and Matteo's whimpering. You okay? Elena asked, wiping a smudge of blood, not hers, off her cheek. She looked exhilaratingly calm. I'm alive, I said, touching my jaw. Is everyone? Tony, how did you know? Tony looked in the rearview mirror, his face grim. Your father woke up. The air left the car. He's awake. I asked. He's awake, Tony confirmed. And he saw the news. He saw the live stream. I looked down at Matteo, who was curled up on the floorboard, defeated. We had won the battle. We had exposed the traitor. But as the adrenaline faded, a new realization settled in. My father was awake. The king had returned. And I had just partnered with the woman who slapped him, the woman from a rival family, and burned down half our infrastructure to save it. Where are we going? Isabella asked from the front seat, turning to look at me. To the hospital, I said. It's time for a family reunion. Elena looked at me, and for the first time, I saw hesitation in her eyes. Derek, she said softly, when we get there, there's something else you need to know about the night I saved him. Something I didn't tell you. What? I didn't just happen to be there, she whispered. Your father invited me. The car seemed to stop moving, even though we were doing 90. What? I'm not just a cleaner, Derek, she said, her voice trembling slightly. I'm his daughter. The silence that followed was louder than the gunfire. I stared at her, the woman I had fought beside, the woman who looked nothing like me but had the same fire in her eyes. Twist number 4, she murmured, looking away. Everything had changed. The silence in the SUV was heavier than the armored plating of the doors. We were tearing down the I-95, leaving a trail of destruction at the Alpine estate, but the chaos outside was nothing compared to the wreckage inside my head. I'm his daughter. I stared at Elena. The streetlights flickered across her face in rhythmic intervals of light and shadow. I searched for it, the resemblance. I had been so focused on her tactical efficiency, her cold professionalism, that I hadn't looked at the architecture of her face. But now I saw it. the set of her jaw, the shape of her brow. And those eyes, the Santoro eyes. Dark, calculating, unyielding. How? I managed to choke out. The word felt inadequate. Elena didn't look at me. She stared out the window, her hand resting on her holster. My mother was a jazz singer in Harlem. Late 80s. Marco, he had a life before he was the Don. A life he kept separate from yours. He knew. I asked, my voice rising. He knew about you? He found me 6 months ago, Elena said quietly. He didn't want a reunion, Derek. He wanted a ghost. He knew someone in the inner circle was turning, but he didn't know who. He couldn't trust his lieutenants. He couldn't trust you, not because you're not loyal, but because you were too close to the blast zone. He needed someone with his blood but without his last name. So he hired you, I said, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. To be his waitress. To be his fail-safe, she corrected. The dinner with the Alvarezes was the trap. He made himself the bait. He knew the attempt would happen there. My job was to stop it and track the killer back to the source. I looked at Tony in the driver's seat. Did you know? Tony kept his eyes on the road. I drive the car, Derek. I don't ask about the passengers. Isabella, sitting in the front passenger seat, turned around. Her face was smeared with soot from the firefight, but she looked strangely amused. Well, she drawled, family holidays are going to be interesting. The sister I didn't know exists just saved the father who tried to kill my father, while I helped the ex-fiancé I'm supposed to hate capture the traitor. She shook her head. I need a drink. We screeched into the emergency bay of Mercy Hospital. It was a fortress. Uniformed police were at the perimeter, but closer to the doors were men in suits, our men. They saw the SUV and immediately formed a phalanx. We piled out. Tony dragged a bloodied and weeping Matteo from the back seat. Elena and I flanked him, moving like a single unit. We bypassed the triage desk, marching straight to the private elevators. The ride up to the ICU was silent. The numbers ticked up, 3, 4, 5. He's going to be weak, Elena warned me as the doors opened. The antidote works, but the toxin took a toll. He better be strong enough to explain this, I muttered. We walked down the corridor. It was cleared of other patients. At the end of the hall, 2 massive guards stepped aside. I pushed the door open. The room was dimly lit by the glow of medical monitors. The rhythmic beep 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 was the heartbeat of the Empire. Marco Santoro lay in the bed, propped up by pillows. He looked smaller than I remembered. His skin was pale, almost translucent, and tubes ran from his arms. But when he turned his head, the eyes were the same. The predator was still in there. He looked at me. Then he looked at Elena. And for the first time in my life, I saw Marco Santoro smile. A genuine, tired smile. You made a mess, he rasped, his voice sounding like gravel grinding together. We cleaned up your mess, I shot back, stepping into the room. I gestured to Tony, who shoved Matteo forward. The traitor fell to his knees at the foot of the bed. Marco's smile vanished. He looked down at Matteo, the man who had poured his wine for 20 years, the man who had held me at my baptism. Matteo, Marco whispered. It wasn't angry. It was disappointed. Why? Matteo was sobbing now, snot and blood running down his face. You're old, Marco. You're soft. The commission, they said the Santoros were done. They offered me the city. They offered you a grave, Marco said softly. He didn't yell. He didn't order his execution. He just looked at Tony. Take him to the Pine Barrens. I don't want him found. Tony nodded, grabbed Matteo by the collar, and dragged him screaming from the room. The door clicked shut, leaving a heavy silence in its wake. Marco turned his gaze to us. To his son. And his daughter. So, he said, coughing slightly, the wolf and the shadow. You work together. You lied to me, I said, stepping closer to the bed. You brought a stranger into our war and didn't tell me. She is not a stranger, Marco said, lifting a trembling hand to point at Elena. She is the only reason we are not all dead. And I didn't tell you, Derek, because I needed to see if you could handle the truth without breaking. What truth? I asked. Marco closed his eyes for a moment, gathering strength. When he opened them, they were filled with a sorrow I hadn't expected. "The poison wasn't the only thing killing me, Derek," he said. "I have cancer. Pancreatic. Stage 4. The floor seemed to drop out from under me. "I have 6 months," Marco continued, his voice steady. "Maybe less. I set this trap for Matteo not just to clear the ranks, but to test you. To see if you were ready to lead." He looked at Elena. "And to see if she was ready to stand beside you." "Stand beside me?" I looked at Elena. She didn't look surprised. She knew. She had known the whole time. "The Santoro Empire is too big for one man now," Marco said. "The world has changed. It requires force, and it requires intelligence. You, Derek, you are the force. You are the loyalty. But Elena, she sees the things you miss. She sees the ghosts." He reached out, one hand toward me, one toward her. "I am not leaving the family to you, Derek," he whispered. "I am leaving it to both of you." I stared at his hand. Then I looked at Elena. The waitress. The sister. The partner. The war with Matteo was over. But the battle for the crown, and the struggle to learn how to share it, had just begun. "Accept it," Marco commanded, his voice hardening. "Or watch everything we built burn to ash." The silence in the hospital room was suffocating. Outside, the world was noisy, sirens, rain, the distant hum of the city, but in here, the only sound was the raspy breathing of a dying king and the shattering of my own reality. "Two heads," I repeated, the words tasting like ash. "You want us to split the throne? A waitress and a bodyguard." "A strategist and a soldier," Marco corrected, his voice weak but his eyes burning with that familiar, terrifying intensity. He lowered his hands, exhausted by the effort of reaching out. "You think you can hold New York alone, Derek? With Matteo gone, the vultures will come. The Russians in Brighton Beach, the triads, the commission itself. They smell blood. They know I am dying." He coughed, a wet, painful sound that made Elena step forward instinctively. She stopped herself, her hand hovering in the air. She was struggling with the dual identity, nurse and daughter, stranger and heir. "I didn't ask for this," Elena said, her voice cool, though I saw the tremor in her fingers. "I agreed to save your life, Marco. I didn't agree to run your empire." "You are a Santoro," Marco whispered. "It is in your blood. You tried to run from it. You joined intelligence. You learned to hunt. But you are a predator, Elena. Just like us." I looked at her. Really looked at her. For the last 24 hours, I had been running on adrenaline and rage. Now, the adrenaline was fading, leaving only a cold clarity. She had dismantled a security team in seconds. She had outsmarted a coup. She had saved my life twice. If she were anyone else, a man, a known associate, I would have respected her. But she was the secret kept from me for 30 years. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked, looking at my father. "All these years. You trained me. You broke me. You molded me. And you had a spare?" "Not a spare," Marco said softly. "A different weapon. You are the shield, Derek. Unbreakable. Loyal to a fault. But a shield cannot see around corners. Elena, she is the dagger in the dark. You need each other. If you try to rule alone, you will be assassinated within a month. If she tries to rule alone, the captains will revolt. Together, you are untouchable." The door to the room creaked open. We all turned, guns half raised out of habit. It was Isabella. She leaned against the doorframe, her arms crossed over her torn gown, looking like a war-torn angel. "He's right, you know," she said, stepping into the tension. "My father, the great Alvarez, respects strength. But he fears unpredictability. If the Santoros show up tomorrow with a united front, the prince and the hidden princess, it scares everyone. It changes the math." She looked at me, her eyes softening. "Derek, we just fought a war in a ballroom. We won. But the peace is harder than the war. If you walk out of here alone, you lose." I looked down at my hands. They were stained with gun oil and Matteo's blood. I had spent my whole life trying to be enough for Marco Santoro. To be the perfect son. Now I realized that being the perfect son meant accepting that I couldn't do it alone. I turned to Elena. She was watching me, waiting. She wasn't asking for permission. She was assessing me, calculating the odds of whether I would shoot her or shake her hand. Matteo is gone, I said, my voice low. But his crew is still out there. The Jersey faction. They'll be confused. Scared. They'll be looking for a new leader, Elena finished, stepping closer. If we hesitate, someone else steps in. We need to secure the accounts. We need to lock down the ports. I know the captains, I said. I know who will bend the knee and who needs convincing. And I know where Matteo hid the leverage, she countered. I hacked his personal server while we were driving. I have the blackmail files he was using to turn your men. We can use them to bring the strays back in line. I looked at Marco. He had closed his eyes, a faint smile on his lips. He had engineered this. Even on his deathbed he was pulling the strings. I held out my hand to Elena. 50-50, I said. We run it together. But on the street I do the talking. You stay in the shadows until we're ready. She looked at my hand, then up at my eyes. A slow, sharp smile spread across her face. 60-40 on the logistics, she negotiated. And I handle the intelligence network. You handle the enforcement. I couldn't help but chuckle. It was a dark, dry sound. Fine. 50-50 on the profits, though. She took my hand. Her grip was strong, calloused. It wasn't the hand of a waitress. It was the hand of a partner. Deal, she said. Isabella clapped her hands once, breaking the moment. Touching. Really. Now we have a problem. The commission has called an emergency meeting at 9 a.m. They want to know why an alpine estate is burning and why Matteo is missing. If the Santoros don't show up to claim the seat, they'll declare the family defunct and carve up the territory by noon. I checked my watch. It was 4 a.m. We have 5 hours, I said, the soldier in me taking over. 5 hours to clean up, suit up, and prepare to walk into a room full of sharks. Marco can't go, Elena said, looking at the monitors. He's too weak. No, Marco rasped, opening his eyes one last time. I cannot go. The king is dead. Long live the kings. He looked at us with a finality that chilled the room. This was it. The torch was passing, not with a ceremony, but with a crisis. Let's go, I said to Elena. We have a kingdom to claim. We turned and walked out of the hospital room side by side. The hallway stretched out before us, long and sterile. We were walking into a future that hadn't existed yesterday. As the elevator doors closed, cutting off the view of my dying father, I looked at the woman beside me. You realize, I said, checking the magazine of my gun, that if we pull this off, we're going to be the most dangerous family in history. Elena adjusted her emerald dress, concealing her weapon. That was the plan, brother. That was always the plan. The mahogany doors of the Empire Club in Midtown Manhattan were thick enough to stop a bullet, but they couldn't stop the whispers. Inside the private boardroom, the heads of the 5 families, the commission, sat like vultures waiting for a carcass. They knew Marco was dying. They knew Matteo was missing. They expected a vacuum, a chaotic void they could fill with their own ambition. They didn't expect us. At 9 a.m. sharp, the doors swung open. I walked in first, wearing a black suit that cost more than my first car, my face a mask of stone. Behind me, the room's oxygen seemed to vanish. Elena walked in. She wasn't wearing the emerald dress anymore. She was dressed in a white tailored power suit, sharp and blindingly bright against the dark wood of the room. It was a statement. She wasn't hiding in the shadows. She was the light that revealed the dirt. Don Moretti, the de facto head of the commission, sat at the head of the table. He was a dinosaur, a man who believed women belonged in the kitchen or the church. He scowled as we approached the empty chair at the end of the table, my father's chair. Derek, Moretti grunted, ignoring Elena. We heard about the mess in Jersey. We heard your father is indisposed. We were just discussing the redistribution of the Santoro territories to ensure stability. There will be no redistribution, I said, my voice echoing off the paneled walls. I didn't sit. I stood behind the chair, my hands resting on the backrest. The Santoro family is not dissolving. It is evolving. Evolving. Moretti laughed, a dry, rattling sound. You're a soldier, Derek. A good one. But you're not a Don. You don't have the network. You don't have the patience. And who is this? Your secretary? Elena stepped forward. She didn't look angry. She looked bored. She placed a sleek, silver hard drive on the polished table and slid it across the surface. It spun perfectly, stopping inches from Moretti's hand. My name is Elena Santoro, she said, her voice cool and crisp. And that drive contains the unencrypted ledgers of Matteo Gregori. The room went deathly silent. Matteo was a rat, Elena continued, walking slowly around the table, making eye contact with every boss. He was documenting everything. Every bribe you paid, Don Russo. Every shipment you lost, Don Clancy. Every judge you own, Moretti. He was going to sell you all out to the feds to buy his own kingdom. Moretti stared at the drive like it was a live grenade. And you have the encryption key? I wrote the encryption key. Elena lied smoothly, leaning over the table. You see, gentlemen, Derek brings the fire. I bring the insurance. You can try to carve us up. You can try to war with us. But if you do, that drive goes to the FBI, the IRS, and the New York Times within 10 minutes of the first shot fired. I stepped forward then, the physical hammer to her intellectual anvil. My father is alive, I said, lying by omission about his condition. But he has stepped back. From this day forward, the Santoro seat has two voices. You deal with me on the street. You deal with her on the books. Any objections? Moretti looked at me. Then he looked at Elena. He looked at the drive. He saw the future. A future where the old rules didn't apply, where brute force was backed by cyber warfare and intelligence. He realized he was outmatched. No objections, Moretti muttered, sliding the drive toward himself. Keep it, Elena said, smiling. I have copies. We walked out of the Empire Club not as survivors, but as conquerors. The sunlight hitting the Manhattan pavement felt different. It wasn't just another day. It was the first day of a new reign. We drove back to the hospital in silence, but it was a comfortable silence. The war was over. The enemies were silenced. The family was secure. When we entered Marco's room, the blinds were open. The sun was streaming in, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. Marco was awake, but barely. His breathing was shallow. He looked at us, standing side by side, the soldier and the strategist, and he nodded. A single, imperceptible nod. He didn't need to ask. He saw it in our posture. We had won. Isabella was sitting in the corner, reading a magazine. She looked up and smirked. I assume you didn't kill them? Didn't have to, I said, loosening my tie. Elena scared them to death. Marco closed his eyes, a look of profound peace settling over his features. He had spent his life building a fortress of fear, but in the end, he had built something stronger. He had built a family. Not the one he was born into, but the one he chose, the son he raised and the daughter he found. I walked over to the window and looked out at the city. New York. It was a beast of steel and concrete, a place that chewed people up and spit them out. But as I stood there, with my sister checking the monitors and my father resting, I realized I wasn't afraid of it anymore. The waitress had slapped the boss. The slap had echoed around the world. And in the silence that followed, we had found the only thing that mattered. Loyalty. I turned back to Elena. So, I asked, what's the first order of business, boss? She looked up from the charts, her eyes flashing with that Santoro fire. First, we fire the wine distributor at La Velluti. Then, we take over the East Coast. I smiled. I'll get the car. The story of Derek and Elena wasn't ending here. It was just beginning. And God help anyone who stood in our way. If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, smash that like button right now. It helps the channel growing and lets me know you want more crime thrillers like this. Make sure you subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss a chapter. Comment Team Santoro below if you think Derek and Elena are going to rule the city. Thanks for watching.